All right, welcome Snowfighters. My name is Phil Harwood, and I'll be presenting today's webinar titled Mastering the Price Increase Dilemma. How about that for a title? Off-season pricing and estimating review. If we haven't met, I'm an attorney based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I own a consulting business called Tamarisk Business Advisors. I also own a law firm called Tamarisk Legal Advisors, and I am the face of the Snowfighters Institute, along with some other folks that you're going to meet in future webinars and other events that we're going to have. The Snowfighters Institute was founded by industry legend John Allen, and I got involved several years ago, and it's been a great experience. And more recently, we've partnered with the Grow Group, which is Marty Grunder's consulting business. Marty Grunder owns Grunder Landscaping based in Dayton, Ohio. Marty and I go way back in the industry. I think both of us are coming up on 40 years in the industry, landscape and snow removal industry. So Marty's a great guy, and I'm real excited to partner with him and his team. I did want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be available. And I believe we're going to make all these webinars available on YouTube and probably on the website. And so anyway, we are recording. And I am the host and moderator of this webinar. I will not be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar. I'm going to hold on to that until the end, and then I'll check the chat for questions. So if you have questions along the way, just go ahead and type them in there, and we'll see how many of those we can get through. If you also don't want to ask a question publicly, and you want to just send me an email, phil@snowfightersinstitute.com is a good email, phil@snowfightersinstitute.com. All right. Now, we have some of the most amazing sponsors, and the Snowfighters Institute is sponsored by some of the top brands in the industry. And these are sponsors, these are companies who have invested heavily in education. They believe in professional development. They've been supporters of the Snowfighters Institute, among lots of other things in the industry. And you probably recognize many of these brands, but I just wanted to mention each one of them individually. They're very important to us, and they help offset the costs for everything that we do for our attendees. So Caterpillar, Douglas Dynamics, which includes Western, Fisher, and SnowX, WeatherWorks, Team Engine, Boss Software, Frost Solutions, Storix Plows, Midwest Salt, Site Photos, Influential Encounters, Tamarisk Business Advisors, which is my firm, and the Grow Group. So big shout out to our sponsors. I also wanted to just take a real quick minute. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but I did want to mention what we have upcoming, because we have a lot of content coming at you, including a monthly webinar, starting with this very first webinar that we're doing, launching the 2025 season. And we're just going to do these webinars every month. So you can see the lineup there. Our August webinar will be on the 12th, and it's going to be focused on subcontracting. And then you can see the other topics as we move through September, October, November, and December. All these webinars we have set up at 10 a.m. Eastern. They're all going to be recorded. So go ahead and register as they come up. I know these will be populating on the website very shortly. We also have some online workshops. These are going to be deeper dives. We're going to do 9 to 4, so 9 to 12 with a nice break. And then a nice lunch break, like we'll take a full hour break because you can't stare at your computer for 7 hours. And then we'll do another 3 hours in the afternoon and be done by 4 p.m. So these are deep dive workshops. These are not recorded. These are just for the attendees. And our July 22 workshop is going to be on selling snow contracts. So we're going to go a lot deeper into the area of sales than we are today when we're just specifically talking about pricing. Okay, and you'll be able to register for all these workshops on the website as well. We have 2 in-person events this year. August 6th and 7th will be our Forum for Sales. This is hosted by Milton Catt in Milford, Massachusetts. This is a day-and-a-half event. We've dialed these back from 2 days to a day and a half based on feedback from previous attendees. Also, we have an operations management in-person event, September 10th and 11th. That's going to be hosted by the Grow Group in Dayton, Ohio. And you can register for those events today at snowfightersinstitute.com. We're also kicking off a brand new peer group model, and you'll have to stay tuned for more information. We don't have all the details figured out yet. Well, we do, but we're waiting for one of our sponsors to make a commitment as far as dates, because we're going to launch these peer groups in person, which is going to be super cool. So more information coming about these. These are specialized peer groups by functional area. So we'll have peer groups for owners and snow commanders, for sales and account managers, operations managers, and office managers, and financial people, controllers, and that type of thing. Each of these groups has very unique needs. They have unique things they want to discuss. And so I've been involved in peer groups for many, many years, and this is really kind of best practice. Looking ahead to 2026, we already have 2026 mapped out. I didn't put all the dates in here, but we're going to do monthly webinars. And you can see the whole line up there, talking about employee issues, equipment, postseason wrap-up, client reviews, planning, contracts. And then we'll move right back into July. We may even repeat some of the topics that we're going through in 2025, okay? 2026 workshops are going to look very similar to what we're doing this year, 2025, with the exception of, or with the addition of a March workshop focused on really strategic planning for the snow season. For 2026, we're going to have 4 in-person events starting in April with Inner Circle. In August, we're going to have our Forum for Sales event, just like we are having this year. In September next year, we're going to have something called Grow Snow. So if you've ever been to Grow, which is the Grow Group and Marty Grunder's big event for the landscape industry called Grow, this is a very well put together industry event, and we're going to replicate this for the snow industry, which is going to be super cool. And then in October, we'll have our ops management in-person event. So please subscribe if you're not subscribed so you can stay current on all our information and our newsletters and updated information. Please listen to our podcast. We have some great content on our podcast, and you can catch all this stuff on our website. And invite a friend or a coworker to jump in and be part of this as well, especially our free monthly webinars. And alumni receive special pricing. And so you are an alumnus of the Snowfighters Institute if you've been to one of our events, including our in-person or online workshops. So with that being said, let's jump into our material for today. So again, questions, I'm going to handle them at the end. Go ahead and type them in the chat if you want to ask questions along the way, or just shoot me an email, phil@snowfightersinstitute.com. Happy to respond, and I always love talking about snow. So our agenda for today, we really have 3 questions to tackle. So do you need to increase prices? How are price increases calculated? And what other changes might you consider making with your estimating process before we get into the heart of the selling season? Okay, so we're going to start off with this first question. We're just going to take them in order. So here's kind of the current reality, okay? And this has been true for several years now, more recently in the last 3 or 4 years. But prices have increased. So wages have gone up. Material prices have increased. Equipment costs have increased. Subcontractor costs have increased. Our utility costs have increased. Our rents have increased. Almost all of our costs have increased. I honestly can't think of something that has gone down unless you are looking at, the last 6 months, maybe something's went down. Price of gas went down a little bit here in Michigan, but if you look at over the last several years, we've seen pretty dramatic, almost shocking increases in all of our costs. And in a lot of cases, we haven't kept up with our pricing. And so as we're thinking about renewing contracts, we really have to stare down our pricing and say, are we okay? Or do we need to make some adjustments? Or maybe you've made some big increases in the past and you're okay for this year, or you need to just keep that going, keep that 3%, 4%, 5% going, because your customers have embraced, maybe not willingly, but they have embraced a price increase, whereas maybe 5 years ago it was a 0%, you couldn't get anything past a customer without losing a contract. Today, customers are willing, I think, in general to accept price increases. So maybe you just want to keep that going. Okay. So that's our current reality that we're living in. From our perspective or your perspective, if I can kind of walk in your shoes for a minute, we need to increase prices because we need to maintain our profit margins. If our costs are increasing and we don't maintain price increases at the same level, our our margins are going to erode, and maybe that's not okay. Maybe we don't want to give away margin. Okay. And our customers should understand because all of their costs have increased too. Their labor costs have increased. Every time they go to the grocery store, they're paying more for food. So they should expect an increase from us, right? We just need to communicate effectively. We need to explain what we're doing, and we need to be reasonable. We can't be greedy in our price increases. Okay, so that's our perspective, right? I mean, it's a rational, thoughtful way of thinking about price increases, right? However, our customers might have a different perspective. So our customer might surprisingly kind of share our perspective. They might understand and expect an increase as long as it's communicated effectively and it's reasonable, and it's just because we care about our service providers, we love them, we want to make sure they're profitable, we want to make sure that they have the resources they need to be ready. You think about snow removal, fighting snow is, like a fire department, right? So you're on guard, you're ready to go all the time, ready to slide down the pole and hop in the fire truck and go, right? Well, there's a cost to that. There's a readiness fee that has to be incurred. So, the 1% of our customers understand that and they're 100% on board and they're like, yeah, whatever you need, man. You're my guy, you're my gal. Like, we love you, we're going to protect you. However, there's another perspective, the alternative perspective, which may be more realistic in that we don't want price increases. We may reject price increases flat out. I think this is becoming less of the hard line opinion like I talked about earlier. I think generally people are willing to accept a little bit of a price increase, but there are customers that will just flat out reject all price increases, and a price increase is going to force rebidding the contract. If you're in a multi-year contract and you're trying to get a little bump that's not in the contract, no. The answer is no. I'm going to hold you to it. We just kind of really don't care. Because there's another contractor waiting in the wings. I have 5 other contractors who are really good, and I play them all off each other. And so I don't really care about you and your situation and your price increase that you feel you need or deserve. I care about me and my budget, my CAM charges. So that's another alternative, or more likely somewhere in the middle, right? Because those are extreme positions. I think most customers are somewhere in the middle. They're generally going to tolerate a price increase if there's effective communication and if the price increases are reasonable. Okay. And here's the other reality. Okay. If rebidding the contract is what's going to happen, it's essentially going to result in repricing at the current price because everyone's going to price that contract with today's cost structure and today's pricing. So if you're you know unwilling customer, your uncaring customer is forcing you to bid the contract, or maybe they care a lot, but it's just coming down from the top from some CFO in some other state, down in Texas where it doesn't snow ever. um, you know, okay, fine. But if you rebid the contract, if they be rebid the contract, they're going to get current pricing. And so they're going to end up exactly where you wanted to take them with your price increases. And, maybe we just need to explain that to them. Maybe they hadn't thought it through. Maybe they have, but maybe they haven't. So we need to increase prices. Yes? Okay, well, not so fast. Let's stop and think for a minute. There might be reasons not to increase your prices. Okay, so what would those be? Well, we're going to talk about them in a minute. But you also might increase prices, depending on the type of opportunity. So maybe you're going to increase prices by 10% for new opportunities, but only increase prices for existing properties by a smaller percentage, maybe 5%, maybe zero. Maybe you're going to lock in your current pricing for your current customers that have been with you forever, and you're just going to hit that new opportunity with that new price increase. Okay? There's lots of different nuances to this. It doesn't have to be across the board. All right? That's the point of this. Or we might even lower our prices. Why would we lower our prices? That doesn't make any sense. Okay? Well, maybe our profit margin is already above what our target is. Maybe we've done some analysis, which is a really good thing to do at the end of the season, do some cost studies, and you're probably doing that right now, and that's why you're thinking about price increases. And you're realizing, hey, this property or maybe this entire customer group is already in our sweet spot. We're okay. We don't need to increase prices. Or maybe we made a mistake, or we have a subcontractor who's just coming in at a very low price, and we actually want to be the hero and go, you know what, we need to bump up these properties over here, but actually we did our analysis and we've identified two or three properties. We're actually going to lower your price. Man, that would be just music to a customer's ears for you to say, we're going to lower your price, right? We're going to give you back something. Okay, so there's different ways to think about this. Maybe there's some strategic reason why you don't want to increase prices. Okay, maybe you just don't want to open the door to your competitors. You have a really good thing going. You know that if you force through a price increase, it's going to trigger an opportunity for your competitors, and you just don't want to open that door. Well, that's a really good strategic reason to just not increase your prices and accept the margin hit for that one customer. Okay. This customer, right, might refer you work. What's the value of that? If the you have a customer who's brought in through their relationships millions and millions of dollars of contracts over the last 5 years, I'm not going to mess that up. Like, they're part of my sales team, and I'm not paying them a salary for doing sales for me, right? There's some value there, so I'm willing to hold the line. Again, I might even dial back my pricing a little bit to just say thank you and reconfirm that relationship. This might be a marquee property, a very visible property, a property that everyone knows in your market. And there's huge marketing benefit from having your vehicles and equipment out there, a trailer maybe, or just having your name being known as, oh, we're the company that takes care of X property in your market. That there can be great value from that. What would the cost of that marketing effort be to replace that lost marketing benefit if you lost that contract? That's what you really have to think about here. Maybe this customer is someone really important in the community. Again, maybe they're not giving you direct referrals, but just having the credibility of saying, well, we work with so and so and take care of their properties. I mean, just you saying that just immediately gives you this status, this place, and there's a huge value to that. Again, we have to think about these things. What else? Maybe there's some other strategic reasons why we don't want to increase prices, even though, financially the math says we should. Okay. We're going to make a different decision based on some other information. Okay. The question is, can you justify not raising prices? We can definitely justify raising prices. There's lots of reasons for that. We just talked about a whole bunch of them, but maybe there's some reasons we can justify not raising prices. So we need to be thoughtful about this. Okay, now, so did we answer that question? Do you need to raise prices? Well, probably, but maybe not, right? It's not a yes, no clean answer. And if you think about it, it's really property specific. It's at the property level that we're going to make this decision, and then we want to, moving up from that property level, if we move up one level, we're going to be at the customer level. Are we going to affect that customer? Or are we going to leave that customer alone? If that customer has 10 properties, maybe we're going to adjust one property but leave the other 9 alone, or some version of that. And then we need to look at maybe we're going to look at this by region. If you have a larger company, I work with a lot of companies that are in many, many states. So maybe you want to look at it by state or by region or territory or by branch. So there's different kind of levels or layers to this decision making that we need to kind of look at. So let's move on. Um, so our second question is, how are price increases calculated? Now, this might sound like a really simple kind of duh question. Costs go up, prices go up accordingly. And we could probably hold an entire full day workshop on just pricing if we really got into the weeds. So if we looked at overhead recovery models, price elasticity, equipment depreciation, and all the other considerations that go into financial modeling and true pricing analysis. There's no way we're going to get that deep on this webinar, but I do want to show you some helpful ways to think about pricing. So there's some information I want to go through next that kind of talks about, high level, how we could think about price increases and how we could calculate them. And hopefully this will be insightful information for you. So essentially, there's two basic pricing strategies. There's market-based pricing, and there's cost-based pricing, okay? And so we're going to look at how these work, and we're going to talk about which one's best and which one you should employ. Okay, so let's start with the market-based pricing strategy. So what is this? Well, this is what the market is willing to bear. That's what you hear all the time, okay? In other words, what are your customers willing to pay? And it's that simple. We just need the information from the customers. So how do we get that information from the customers? Where does it come from? Do we just ask the customers? Yes, you do. Because some customers will just give it to you, and you can just, you know, politely ask them and say, hey, we're working on our pricing and we're just curious. You've been a great customer, a strategic partner for many, many years, and we go way back, and we've gone to football games together, and I went to your daughter's wedding and blah blah blah. And like we're friends. Pull back the curtain and give me some information. Help me. It'd be great if you could help me. I don't want to put your job at risk if you can't share this information, cool. But if you can, I'd love to see it. Sometimes you just have to ask and they'll give it to you. Every time there's a yes, no decision. So a new opportunity or renewal. So if you win the work, sometimes they'll just give you all the information. Sometimes it's all in a spreadsheet and they can just email it over to you. They can give you a copy of it. You just have to ask. If the answer is no and you didn't win the work, well, now you're even in a better position to get pricing information because they feel bad because you've done such a nice job during the sales process. They've come to adore you, and the last thing you want to do is hurt your feelings. And so, the answer is no, you didn't win the work, but at least you can do is give me the pricing so I can see where I went wrong. Because it's always about the price, right? No matter what reason you lost a contract, it's always about the price. So call their bluff and say, okay, great. If it's about the price, why don't we talk about pricing so I can learn? Obviously, I need to learn something about our pricing. So can you share the information with me so I can become better? And maybe next year or in 3 years, when your contract goes out for bid again, I can be in a better position. Okay. So every time there's a yes, no decision, go for the pricing. We want current pricing, and that's how we can get it. Okay. If we have any public bid information, or if we're doing public bids, or even if you're not, I mean, you can go look. Now, public bid information is probably going to be lower than what you would consider market-based pricing for standard commercial work, but it can be insightful. It could be a reference point. And certainly if you're bidding something that is in the public space, so maybe it's a quasi-governmental entity, they have to disclose that information, and you can find information from last time the contract went out for bid. And maybe that was before all the prices went crazy, post 2020. But I don't know. The information's out there. It's worth looking at. All right. So what information are we trying to get? Okay, when I say get pricing information, what specifically are we talking about? Well, we would love to see what that seasonal price is, especially if it's an all-inclusive seasonal price. We'd like to see what that number is so we can benchmark it against our number. If there's caps involved, we want to see what those caps are and how they're calculated. We want to look at hourly rates, certainly for labor and equipment. De-icing prices, bulk salt, treated salt, different types of bag material, brine, all the hot mixes, like whatever information we can get. The more granular we can get, the better. And ideally, if they can just email us over their spreadsheet that has everything in it, that would be even better. Okay, so we want all this stuff. One of the ways that I've had a customer share information with me in the past was really interesting. I just want to tell the story real quick. I was signing contracts. We had a big pile of contracts to sign. We had lots of properties with this management company. This is in my previous life before I started consulting, so 20 years ago-ish. But I was meeting with this vice president of property management for this large consulting or property management firm. And he said, Phil, you need to sign all these contracts. And then he looked at me and he said, in this pile are all the contracts for the other contractors, your competitors, these are the contracts you didn't win. Okay, so this pile over here is the one you did win. You need to sign these. I'm also leaving these here, and I have a meeting, and I'll be back in 30 minutes. And he walked out and shut the door. And hello, it was a gift from my vice president friend, customer, to give me all the pricing of all my competitors. And of course, since we all have a camera built into our phones, even 20 years ago, we started taking pictures. So, there's different ways your customers can help you, okay? We just need to let them know we want to be helped. All right, now, caution with market-based pricing strategies. Not all pricing is apples to apples. So when we're looking at competitors' pricing, we need to kind of go a little deeper and say, is this a comparable scope? Are the expectations the same as ours? Are there different triggers here? Are they factoring in all the compliance requirements that this customer demands from us? Because all that costs money. So we can't just take pricing at face value. We have to look under the hood and understand what we're looking at. So we have to go a little deeper. So don't just assume it's apples to apples pricing, because it's probably not. And certainly customers don't understand these differences. And this is the problem with customers who just take all this disparate pricing and throw it in a spreadsheet, because it's not apples to apples. And we know this, but the customers sometimes don't know this, especially if someone's newer in the industry as a property manager. They don't know what's going on. And this is an opportunity for us in our sales process to educate our customers in terms of how to compare scope and expectations and triggers and compliance and all the things, so they can rationalize the price variance between competitors. Some customers have no stomach for this, but some do. And so this is a really helpful part of our sales process. When we do our online sales workshop, and certainly in person at Forum for Sales, we're going to go really deep into all the sales strategy, different sales techniques. Unfortunately, in a 1 hour webinar, we're not going to get to that level today. Okay, so let's move on. Market-based pricing. So we have market-based pricing. We got the information. Now what? Where do we go from here? Well, we have to create a plan using that market-based pricing. And ultimately, our plan is going to result in a financial model, so a projection, or if you want to call it a budget, and it's going to include things like, well, what do we need for sales, and what are our direct costs, our cost of goods sold, what's our gross profit objective, and how much gross profit are we going to make based on this market-based pricing. Obviously, we need to factor in our overhead so we can get down to net profit. Okay. So that's kind of where we're headed. I'm going to show you an example of how this market-based pricing strategy kind of plays out when we're doing modeling. So let's start with this spreadsheet right here. And let's assume that we have one big job. We only have one big job in our company, and our customer told us this big job is going to go for $1 million. So if we price it at $1 million, we're good. Okay, and if you don't want to think about one big job, maybe the $1 million represents all of your jobs collectively, which is realistically how this works. But for simplicity, assume it's one big job, $1 million job. Well, we know our overhead because we know what we pay our office staff. Our overhead includes all of our administrative costs. So our rent, our utilities, our office salaries, all that stuff, right? If you have a mortgage, it's your mortgage payment. It's that stuff. Okay. And we know what those costs are, or we should know. So if we know what our selling price is, because our customer told us what our selling price is, $1 million, and we know what our overhead is, let's assume it's 350, which is 35% of our revenue. Okay, well, part of the puzzle is coming together for us. The next thing we have to do is figure out how much profit we need or want. Okay, let's assume we want a big, juicy, healthy net profit of 35%. So we need $350,000 of net profit based on our $1 million revenue amount. Well, that means we need $700,000 of gross profit. That's a 70% margin, which is very attainable in the snow industry if you're not subcontracting work, if you're doing internal work. You're not going to get 70% gross margin if you're subcontracting all of this $1 million. If you are, good luck, but that's a reasonable number. So if we know what these numbers are, if we know what the gross profit is at 700,000, which gives us enough to cover our overhead of 350 and give us a nice juicy net profit of 350. Well, now we know we can back our way into that cost of goods sold number, and we know that we need to not exceed $300,000 in cost of goods sold. And we can break those out by our different categories with labor, materials, equipment, subs, okay? Again, simplistic model, but I'm showing you how to take market-based pricing where you're starting with only the selling price and you're backing your way into a pricing model that makes sense. Okay, so that's how this works. Now, the other pricing strategy is called a cost basis pricing strategy. So this is where we would start with answering the question, well, what do we need to achieve our profit objectives based on our internal information, our own cost information? So we look at how much we're paying our people, including labor burden, how much we're buying materials for, what are all our equipment costs, what are our subcontractors costing us, what's our overhead, what's our overhead recovery method, okay? And when we look at each one of these, it sounds simple, right? Oh, we just grab these costs and add them all up. Well, if you take each one of these and think about it, there's a lot more nuance to this. So this cost basis pricing strategy where we're starting with our own costs and we're going to set pricing based on that gets a little complicated. So I just want to roll through some of these real quick and talk about each one. So with labor costs, how do you know which employees are going to be on which jobs when you're bidding work? You don't. So we have to make assumptions. We have to make assumptions about, or we have to use average weighted costs. And then, are the production rates that we're using in our estimating model accurate to determine our labor hours? And they may or may not be. And we could have a long discussion about production rates. Are those labor costs going to increase next year or the year after if it's a 3-year contract? And if they are, by how much? We have to make assumptions. That's what's tricky about this. Yeah, we know what we're paying somebody today. We know what we're paying all of our people today to the penny. Okay, we can look at our last payroll run, but we have to make assumptions about the future when we're pricing. With materials, do we know if there's going to be a salt shortage this year and our price is going to spike? Do we know if our application rates are accurate? Do we know what type of storms we're going to have this coming winter? Because different types of storms will require different amounts of materials, different types of course we don't. We're making assumptions, and that's what gets tricky about cost basis. Equipment, are we renting, leasing, or buying that specific piece of equipment that's on this job that I'm bidding today in July? Well, we don't know. We don't know. What does our depreciation schedule look like? How many hours are we going to run each piece of equipment so we can calculate an hourly rate for each piece of equipment? We don't know. We have to make assumptions. Does our hourly rate include an operator, and how much are we paying the operator? Subcontractors, which subs are going to be on which properties? How much are you going to have to pay your subs this coming winter or next winter or the year after that? How much supervision do the subs that you hire need? And what's the administrative burden to manage all these subs? These are tricky, in-depth financial questions with lots of assumptions. And then overhead, you know, what's going to change with our overhead? Are we going to hire more people next year? Are we adding a location? Are we investing in new technology? And then what overhead recovery method are we going to use? And I'm not even going to get into that because that's a whole nother webinar. So the pros of this of using a cost basis pricing strategy is that it's very accurate. It's the most accurate way to determine a pricing model, a profitability model. But the downside is we really have to work with some financial experts to get these numbers accurate. And there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made along the way. So let's look at an example of cost-based pricing. So this is just the opposite. We don't know the revenue. We don't know what the selling price is. We know what our costs are because we just did all this cost investigation. We did forensic cost analysis and we came up with all of our costs. So we know for this job that we're bidding, we know this $1 million job we're bidding, we know what our costs are. We have $300,000 worth of costs, and we know what our overhead is. Remember, it's 350. Okay, so now what? How do we get the revenue number? We have to be careful here because we have to use the right math, and this is where a lot of companies go wrong in their estimating pricing system. They use the wrong math. Okay, so this is the markup method where on the left, we're starting with that cost, that $300,000, that's our cost of goods sold, and we're marking that up by 70%. Okay, so 300,000 times 70% gives us a profit of 210. If you don't believe me, get out your calculator right now and type in 300 times 0.7 and you'll get 210. Okay, and then if we add 210 to 300, we get 510. That's our selling price with a 70% markup. It really is, okay? That's on the left. If you look on the right column here, you'll see what happens to our profit margin. So if we sell a job for 510 and our costs are 300, our profit margin is only 41%. And now you go, wait, time out. I marked it up by 70%. How come my profit margin isn't 70%? And if you don't believe me that it's 41.2, type in your calculator 210 divided by 510, because that's how we get our profit margin. It's that we didn't do the math right. So we don't want to use a markup method. We never want to use a markup method. Markups are used commonly in retail and some other industries. We never, ever, ever want to do this. What we want to use is what's called the margin method. We're starting at the same starting point, $300,000 in costs, but we want to increase that by a desired margin. So what we do, instead of multiplying by 0.7, we divide by 1 minus 0.7. Okay, so $300,000 divided by 30% gives us our selling price of $1 million. So if you don't believe me, try it. Type in 300 divided by 0.3 and you'll get you get 1,000, but it's $1 million. Okay, so on the right, $1 million selling price. Our costs are 300. Our profit is 700. That's our gross profit, 70%. Now we have the right math going on. Okay, so it's really important. Now, if we go back to our model, we can plug in the $1 million selling price. We have all of our cost of goods sold because on our cost basis, we started with that. We know what our gross profit is, 700. We know what our overhead is, and we have that nice healthy net profit. Okay, so that's the margin method that we want to use. So which is best, the market-based model or the cost-based model? Well, every company is unique to begin with, so that's a vote for the cost-based model because, everyone's overhead structure and what they pay their people and what they pay for rent and where they live and all that stuff, that's all very unique, even in the same town, right? But we also have this competitive reality that exists, and that's a vote for market-based pricing. And those are the two extremes. Really the best answer is we need both. We need to understand what the market's doing. We have to be competitive So we have to keep our eye on the market. We have to understand market pricing, but we also have to understand our own cost structure. And we have to do our own analysis to make sure we're profitable. So you really have to do both and juxtapose them with each other to get to that ultimate pricing model. It's a little complicated, but it's worth doing, it's worth the effort. Okay, so we talked about whether or not we need a price increase. We talked about how price increases are calculated. I got 20 minutes and I'm going to try to tackle well, actually, we got a little bit more material here, pardon me. So we need to stay on this price increase because we did not talk about how they're calculated. We talked about the two pricing strategies, but we're going to talk here briefly about how to actually do the math with price increases. So let's look at this spreadsheet here. So the left-hand column is the model that we've already looked at several times. We have this $1 million selling price or $1 million revenue if you want to pool all your contracts together. We have this cost of goods sold of 300,000, gross profit of 700, overhead of 350, net profit of 350. If we increase all of our costs by 10%, which you can see in that middle column, what happens to our profit? And the right-hand column is the variance by line item. Okay, so you can see all the costs went up by 10%. We didn't increase our selling price yet. So we're still only getting paid $1 million. All our costs went up by 10%. What happened to our net profit? It went down 18.6%. No, that's not good. How do we fix it? Do we just increase our price by 10%, or do we need to increase our price by 18.6% to fix the problem? Well, thankfully, all we need to do is increase our price by 10%. And I can prove it by showing you this slide right here. So if we increased our price from $1 million to $1.1 million, and we still only had a 10% price increase or cost increase, now our net profit has also gone up by 10%. And we have, instead of 350 net profit, we have 385. We're good. Okay. So that was a lot. All right, let's talk about our third question. What other changes might you consider making with your estimating process before we really get into the heart of the snow season? And by the way, the snow selling season is year-round. Contracts have already been renewed. There are lots of contractors that are renewing contracts in April, right at the end of the season, which is cool. I don't know if there's enough time to do the analysis with your cost and your pricing and reviewing your contracts and all the things you need to do to get out there and renew contracts. But props to anybody who's renewing contracts in April, because I just think that's pretty cool. All right, one thing you can do in your estimating process is you can link your price increases to a reliable metric. Okay. And there's kind of two ways to think about this. One is to actually embed that metric into your contract. So you're declaring it to your clients and you're holding yourself to it. Okay. You're putting it in the contract. This is a 7-year contract, and every year there's going to be a price increase based on some metric. Okay. And the other way to think about this is just more of an internal checkpoint, okay, where you're not disclosing this to a customer, you're not linking the contract to a metric, you're just using this information internally to say, hey, what's a reasonable price increase? If we're going to increase prices according to the economy, what is it? What's the increase? Okay. So there's two metrics I want to talk about here, and there's lots of metrics out there, but two of them that are used frequently and are easy for your customers to understand are COLA and the CPI. Okay, COLA is the cost of living adjustment that's made every year by the Social Security Administration. So every year, Social Security benefits go up by X% based on the government's analysis of the economy. Okay, for 2025, for this year, costs went up 2.5%. The COLA went up too. So everyone's Social Security checks went up 2.5% for 2025. So that's a good, reliable indicator of the economy. It's simple. Everyone can Google it in 2 seconds. There's no there's not 1,000 different variables, and you don't get lost in the weeds with this. It's very simple. It's high level. Okay. If you look at the history of the cost of living adjustment, I have the last several years here listed out. If you go back to 2020, it was 1.3, and I think 2019 was like 1 point something. And I mean, it was really low. It was very low. And then starting in 2021, it really popped. So 5.9% increase. And then 2022, it went to 8.7. Ouch. So you add 5.9 and 8.7. I mean, we're talking 15 points, right? 16 points in 2 years. Like that hurts. And I know you know that. You lived through it. 2023, it dropped down to 2.3 or 3.2, I'm sorry. And then 2024 was the 2.5 determination, which it is for this year. Okay. So that's cost of living adjustment from the Social Security Administration. The Consumer Price Index is another governmental agency metric. This is produced by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics for May of 2025, which is the most recent number published. It was 2.4%. This can vary by category. So if you look at CPIs, there's all these different consumer price indexes based on different baskets of goods. So, you might exclude, food, or you might exclude technology or whatever. You can also look at these by region. So there's a US overall, but if you're in the Midwest, maybe the Midwest number is very different than the US number globally, or if you're in the New England region, it's very different than the rest of the US as a whole. So the CPI can be a little tricky. If you're saying we're going to link our price increases to the CPI, well, then the question is, well, what CPI? Because there's all this detail, and that's the nice thing about the COLA is just one number. There's not all these different aspects to it. So just something to consider. Something else to consider is this discriminatory price increase situation that we talked about earlier, where we're giving different types of customers different price increases. So we might say, we have new opportunities, they're going to get today's pricing. And then we have our existing customers, and we're going to group them into this ABC. And I hear this all that I heard about ABC forever, my whole career. A customers are our best customers. Okay, maybe we're only going to give them a smaller increase. Maybe it's 2.5% because that's COLA. Or, in my example here, I'm going to give them 5%. B customers, middle of the road customers, they're getting 7.5. Maybe I didn't increase prices last year, so I got some catch up to do. C customers, those are our paying customers. I'm gonna zap them with a 10% price increase. Okay. So if we look at this on a spreadsheet look, we have our $1 million of revenue in that far right-hand column there, which we've been talking about all the way through. And these are with the price increases. So you can see the 385 overhead number. But if you look at the ABC columns, those are our different customer groups, our A customers, B customers, C customers. And just showing an example here of what would happen. So if we increased our A customers by 5%, their new selling price is going to go up by that. And then you can see 7.5 in the middle and 10%. But we want to do this modeling because we want to make sure that we're okay with our margin, right? So you can see all the way at the bottom in the far right, 33.1. We were originally at 35%. So we're not hitting those A customers, which in my example here are half our revenue, with the full 10%, because our costs went up 10%, if you remember, and I'm using the same example. We're only increasing those A customers by 5%. So we're giving up a little margin. Maybe we're willing to do that. Okay, maybe we're okay with 33.1 in our model. What if we didn't give those A customers a price increase at all? Maybe if it instead of 5%, it was 0, and we left the B and C at 7.5 and 10. What does that look like? Right now we're at 33.1 net profit. What do we look like if we go to 0 on the A column? Well, we dropped down to 31.5. Okay, we started at 35, now we're at 31.5. Are we okay with that? Can we justify that? Is that still a healthy enough margin? Of course it is in this model. So we have to kind of think about this. We can't be we can't just arbitrarily zap price increases across the board. We should be smarter about this. Okay. Next thing I want you to think about in terms of strategy for estimating, have your operations team handle estimating. This is a way better approach. Okay. The sales team has a vested interest in selling work, and they should. We want the sales team to sell work, but they're not the best estimators because everybody can do everything in 20 minutes, right? From the salesperson's perspective. Operations is going to be way more accurate with estimating. And then ultimately operations is going to be responsible for to hitting those numbers anyway. So this is a way better approach. So think about that. Next thing to think about, audit and update your production rate values. So how long does it take to plow an acre? How many square feet can a shoveler clear in an hour? That type of thing, right? Well, for what type of storms? We have different types of storms, and how large is the property? Property size makes a big difference with production rates. A person on a shovel is going to be very effective with a 200 square foot sidewalk to a building because they just are a bundle of energy. They've been cooped up in the truck for 2 hours and they get to hop out of the truck for a minute. They're going to be an animal. Okay, so production rate wise, it's going to be ginormous. Okay. But if you had to shovel with a shovel, 4 miles, I'm going to die. Okay. So like size of same thing with equipment, big equipment, small equipment, those production rate values change dramatically based on the size of the property. And then of course, customer requirements. So there's this whole grid of production rate values that change based on all these different variables. The math can get really wacky. I was part of a volunteer committee several years ago that bid a free estimating website called snowbidder.com. And ever since we built snowbidder.com, I have stopped building spreadsheets for people because snowbidder.com does all the math for you. And so go to snowbidder.com to do your estimating. All right. We are at 10:51 and I'm going to stop talking and jump into the Q&A. So I'm going to open up the chat here and just see what's hanging out in the chat. If my screen will allow me to do that. All right. Let's just oh, there's my trellis. Look at that. Beautiful. All right. So stop sharing real quick. We're going to turn off the recording and then we're going to do a Q&A.